Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
Okay, our annual sacrifice to the hockey news gods, the insider gods. Recording our trade deadline preview episode on Wednesday evening. It is currently 6:25 p.m. The trades have, started to come hot and heavy even a couple hours before this, to the point where I was like, is there going to be anyone left by the time we're recording? But we know the way Steve Yzerman operates. At no one else's convenience, at all hours of the day and night, and he's not afraid to take it down to the wire. So we're recording now. This is the official Winged Wheel Podcast trade deadline preview episode for 2024 for the Detroit Red Wings and the rest of the NHL. Listen quick before the news expires.
There is a time limit. I think the deadline's over outside of Detroit. I think they're the only team who hasn't done anything yet. Yeah. Like, this is a Detroit Red Wings trade deadline preview and an NHL trade deadline review.
Essentially, usually we have one or two trades to cover by this point, and we do that quickly while we talk about who Detroit could get or what they might do across the league. But no, I think I listed like 5 or 6 decently sized trades that have already happened. Like trades that cup contenders are making, trades where big names are moving back and forth. So there's going to be some meat on this bone. We're essentially borrowing from future content here. Well, without further ado, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and the upcoming trade deadline. I am one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, it's going to be a bit of a different setup. We are not going to be covering Red Wings games, although there is some Red Wings news to cover. This is going to be primarily trade deadline focused. So we don't typically like to record right before a Red Wings game, which is what we're doing right now. But this is one of those special one-off episodes we do annually, where the focus is less about the hockey that's happened and more about the management and the roster world. So on that note, we're going to start out by talking about the biggest news in the Red Wings world right now, which is Dylan Larkin being out for 2 weeks and the impact that could have on Detroit's playoff push. And then we're going to get into the trade deadline. We're going to talk about trades that have already happened, guys like Middelstadt, Byram, Walker, Tarasenko, Mantha, and more. And then we're going to get into what Detroit might be looking at, what Steve Yzerman thinks Detroit's needs are, what we're hearing in terms of rumors, their name being attached to guys like Brian Rust, potentially in the offseason. They've been around Noah Hanifin. What about guys like Buchnevich or Guentzel or any other targets? We'll be talking about news in terms of Detroit's cap situation, which is intrinsically linked to all of this because Seider and Raymond deals need to be sorted, and apparently they're in progress on that. And then more before we get into your questions and comments in overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that this podcast is primarily supported by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show and allow us to do things like host NHL trade deadline preview and potentially emergency review episodes. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. And if you join there, you also get benefits like access to our bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones. You're automatically entered into all of our giveaways. We're giving away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. Additionally, you get access to our Discord, which is a fantastic community and Patreon exclusive as well. So one more time, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Okay, let's jump into it with the Red Wings news. Dylan Larkin out for 2 weeks. It could be as many as 7 games, including tonight's against Colorado. Tough one. He left at the, closer to the end of the Florida game. He got tangled with Montour, went down the tunnel. We didn't really hear what happened, and then it was announced that he has a lower body injury out for 2 weeks. So that would put him at returning as early as Sunday the 17th, which would be the quickest it could happen, but that's 7 games. Colorado, Arizona, Vegas, and Buffalo on the road, Arizona and Buffalo at home, and then Pittsburgh on the road. Initial reactions.
I am very, very curious to see where the goals are going to come from. And it's concerning. We were all making the same joke on Twitter about, season's over. It's been fun. Good luck, everyone. Hopefully next year we can do it. But there is a genuine level of concern here just because Colorado and Vegas this week. We were talking last episode how the Red Wings need to probably get 3 points out of these next 3 games if they can, given, road trip to cup contending teams who are actively loading up. God, Vegas might have Hanifin by the time Saturday rolls around. And, we've talked about the Red Wings being good this year, but lacking, still that extra top 6 forward they need. And now they're down their best one. It's going to be tough. We've seen players slot in emergency roles in the top 6 before and do it adequately. None have really thrived. Right now it's Veleno, I believe, based on line rushes in practice, that's going to be asked to fill in the Larkin role between DeBrincat and Kane. And we've seen him do it, again, adequately before. But you know who's on a heater right now? The Islanders. You know who's not? The Red Wings. And not to say it's all doom and gloom. Obviously, Philly started selling at the deadline there. So
that's key.
The Red Wings only need to outpace one of the Islanders and the Flyers. But the Islanders are coming, and that 8-point cushion the Red Wings had is down to 4, I believe, right now. And so it's not comfortable. It's not what it was even a week ago. And that's why you build that gap that the Red Wings had, because in instances like this, where the Red Wings lose a couple games in a row and the Islanders win 3 or 4 in a row or whatever it's been, you're still got the upper hand. But there is very, very little margin for error right now. And Larkin being out at this particular moment is concerning.
Yeah, my initial reaction when it came out, I can't actually say it on air. It'd be too much dead air as I tried to bleep that out. But, there's no world where this is a good thing. Someone asked me, is everyone overreacting to this? And I think if the overreaction is Detroit's cooked, they're definitely out of it, and you're being genuine, that's a bit much for me. But let's call it what it is. There's no world where a team loses their first-line center, their captain, and probably on balance their MVP over the course of any season he's playing in, and that's a good thing. It's just not, especially at this time. I like what you said, Brad, about the fact that this is why that cushion was so important, so Detroit has some margin to play with, because even if this goes poorly, and let's say they don't take away half the points they can from those 7 games, they're not so far out of it where they can't fight back into it. And depending on how the teams below them do, they might not even be out of it. They could still be hanging on. So it's important to know that Detroit has margin here. But it's going to take doing. The good news is the schedule is soft, yes. Arizona twice, Buffalo twice, Pittsburgh. You have the ability to win those games and walk away with, a 500 points percentage. And a very good point that's been made everywhere is if you can't beat that schedule to the tune of keeping yourself in the playoff race, then you're just not a playoff team, plain and simple, even without Dylan Larkin. So it's doable for Detroit, but it's more uncomfortable. Don't throw in the towel, but it is something that the Red Wings are going to have to overcome. Joe Veleno has been really impressive this year, and in stints where he has to step up for Larkin, I think there have been moments where he's been exceptional relative to what you might expect from him. But you don't want to do that for too long. We've talked at length about the fact that Detroit has found a lot more success this year because they've been able to put guys in their proper slots in the lineup. Having guys step up and fill in is an important thing to be able to do in your lineup, which they asked Veleno to do, they asked Rasmussen to do, but you don't want to lean on that too long. So I think if Detroit can walk away from those 7 games with a 500 points percentage, obviously you want more, but anything close to that, and I think they're still very much in play here to the point where you don't have to lose much sleep over it.
I think that game against the Islanders later this month is going to be a lot more important than I originally thought.
Yeah, agree.
I thought that was going to be the time that you can kind of put the nail in the coffin of the Islanders season, but
Lou Lamoriello heard you.
Yeah, that's not good.
No, he didn't. Evan still got some facial hair.
That is true.
Oh,
that
is
true. Yeah, you'd be screwed, Ryan.
Yeah, I would be dead instantly. I couldn't even shake his hand. He would kill me.
Yeah. So that game will be obviously critical. Mind you, we are 2 weeks out. Islanders maybe could go in the tank. Maybe the Red Wings win it. The NHL's weird where, the best team can lose to the worst team on any given night. I mean, now that we're at the trade deadline and teams really do start to diverge from one another.
Yeah.
But you never know. There's an opportunity for the Red Wings to sneak out points against Edmonton versus Vegas versus Colorado. It's always a bit of a weighted coin flip, and maybe one night it'll flip the right way for the Red Wings. So, yeah, this is obviously devastating. He's your captain, the heart and soul of the team. But this is why Steve Yzerman brought in some of the additional depth. You know, you're not replacing Dylan Larkin with that depth. That's obvious. But you're hoping that some of these guys can step up and play in an elevated role. And a guy like Joe Veleno, it'll be great to see, you know, how does he stack up now that he's, you know, continued his maturation process this year.
Well, I like the point you mentioned about how weird hockey is. And we've talked about, you know, the Red Wings playoff push, playing the percentages, playing the odds. You know, a couple teams are going to get hot. We said straight up, we don't know what team below the Red Wings is going to get hot. It turned out it was the Islanders. But in the meantime, the Penguins and the Devils have cooked themselves. They're done. They're dead in the water. It'll take a miracle run from one of those two teams to get into the playoffs. And that's the way it goes. So the Red Wings got a bit of good luck. The Devils lost a couple key games to some bad teams. The Penguins lost a couple key games on their road trip. And now all of a sudden, this 11-team playoff race in the East looks pretty comfortably like a 9-team race now.
Yeah, Washington, you never know. Like, Calgary shed players and got better at some point, so Washington could do the same. But really, that's not a team that's tracking to do that.
No, and the big wild card, no pun intended, in the East is the Flyers. You know, they re-signed an extended Sealer, so they're taking him all the way to the playoffs, and they got rid of Walker. So it looks like they are going to sell some pieces, and the Islanders have a more likely chance to catch them. But if neither of them really cools down, then yeah, it's going to be an absolute bloodbath to the deadline between Detroit, Tampa, the Flyers, and the Islanders.
So when Larkin went down, Derek Lalonde said they weren't looking to call anyone up. It's not likely. And that makes a lot of sense, because I think if you're going to call anyone up at this point of the year, you just can't be a team that's competing for the playoffs. Otherwise, you have to be really desperate, I should say. It's not the worst idea in the world, but they either have to have, you know, NHL experience and be able to come up and play these games, or they can't be playing any kind of important role. Like, you really just need them playing closer to 10 minutes, if that. And that really doesn't make sense for Detroit. They've not been in this position pushing for a playoff spot, and a lot of the team's success hasn't been on the backs of like one or two guys. It's been up and down the lineup. This is like the team coming together has been greater than the sum of their parts. So mixing up that whole group, you try to avoid it as much as you can. All that being said, Marco Kasper wasn't in the next Griffins lineup.
Yes.
And I was like, what? I would have heard something. It doesn't really make sense. You didn't really hear much for injury. And I was sending messages out everywhere. And then Bob Kaiser reported soon after that. It just happened to be an injury that kept Marco Kasper out of that game. And it was just like wanting to maintain it, wouldn't be out too long. But the timing on that was hilarious.
It wasn't when I started thinking about it a little bit, I was like, that's not the craziest thing of all time.
No, it wouldn't have been. And the only thing that gave me pause was Marco Kasper really only in the last few months has started to come on in a big way. He did not have a good preseason to the point where I thought, yeah, that guy should be a Red Wing this year. Not at all. If he had a great preseason, I would have thought, yeah, that's a fit. But I was like, are they really going to like pull him away from the Griffins right now, whose point streak ended at 18 games? And yeah, no, it turns out it was just a funny coincidence.
Well, you're not going to get Noah Hanifin without giving up at least one good prospect.
Yeah, that was like the big tinfoil hat. Anyhow, that is the situation is with Dylan Larkin being out. We'll see how it goes. Our next episode, we may be covering some games depending on how the trade deadline goes. And as we transition into the trade deadline conversation here, why don't I fill you in on what we're doing? So today, Wednesday night, we're posting this episode of the trade deadline preview. If things go absolutely buck wild on Friday, the trade deadline is Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. You will have an emergency episode recorded as soon as we humanly possible can. Terrible English, but hopefully better content. That's either going to be Friday night, Saturday morning kind of thing, depending on how things go. If the trade deadline has some things that happen that need reviewing, but not like, Detroit acquired Hanifin and another player and shed Holl and something else. If it's just like depth moves, then we may have something for you on Saturday, but the plan is just to go to our usual episode on Sunday, the 10th, at which point we'll be covering the Colorado game that will have happened, the Arizona game that happened, and the Vegas game that happened. So that's our plan. We are at the mercy of Steve Yzerman, which is always a horrifying thing to be when you cover the Red Wings, because I don't know that man sleeps. I think he sleeps one eye at a time, like a shark.
If the trade deadline ended at 1 a.m. on a Monday morning, Steve Yzerman would make his final trade at 12:59 a.m.
And like 45 seconds.
Yes.
He would have Central Registry on hold and just say go with like 15 seconds left. All right, let's jump into the trade deadline. And I think before we can talk about the Red Wings, we have to talk about the trades that have happened, which have been a lot of them. Just to give ourselves a little bit of Red Wings related news here, why don't we start with the Mantha trade, which I really like this for the Vegas Golden Knights. They got Anthony Mantha, who's in a contract year, 50% retained, so he costs $2.85 million. They have a lot of cap space because Markstrom has a lacerated spleen, I think it is, and they can add, and everyone's heads are exploding once again. And in exchange, the Capitals acquired a 2024 second-round pick and a 2026 fourth-round pick from Vegas. What do you make of that one?
Mantha is going to finish the season with well over 20 goals. Again, contract year, Anthony Mantha is a force, and they didn't have to give up very much for him. They managed to get him at half retained, which, given that now that apparently they have their eyes on Noah Hanifin, is a big deal in this scenario. And yeah, like unironically, I wouldn't have minded if Mantha was Detroit's target to beef up for the rest of the season. And they could have taken him on at full cap hit, so maybe that would have only cost Detroit a third rounder. But no, I really like the move for Vegas. Any depth scoring when you're going for a cup is a good thing.
I think Edmonton also would have been into it as well.
Edmonton was definitely my choice if we're talking Anthony Mantha. Obviously, there's the Ken Holland connection. They were looking for some additional depth up front. Would have made a lot of sense, and I'm very comfortable in taking on Anthony Mantha in a contract year. I'm not comfortable being the team who signs him next.
Now, the next one was interesting to me, and obviously Red Wings fans love to laugh at Ottawa's woes, and they might have an opportunity to do so more here. Vlad Tarasenko wanted to go to Florida. His family's there, and so I think they may have been handcuffed a little bit because of the no trade clause, but they traded Tarasenko to Florida well before the deadline at half retained, and they got a 2024 fourth and a 2025 third. And the condition on the fourth is that it moves to a 2026 third if Florida wins the Stanley Cup.
That's hilarious.
That's so fun. Like, hey, if the player we gave you helps you win a Stanley Cup, we get a pick 1 round better that turns into a third, but we get it 2 years later.
Who comes up with these?
Like that, what's the value in that? I understand a full no trade clause is difficult to work with. And if with the specific context of Florida knows he wants to go there, they weren't going to give up a lot, but at least squeeze him until the deadline, you know?
But at least getting the deal done now allows Ottawa to focus on whatever bigger deals they want to focus on between now and the deadline, and their phone won't be muddied up by Florida offering another conditional third somehow to sweeten the deal. We've seen trades like this over the years. You know, you think back to the Taylor Hall trade from a couple of years ago, where when a player wants to be dealt with a no move clause, you're only going to get so much. If Tarasenko was dead set on Florida, yeah, you just do what you can do. You get what you can get. And maybe I missed the memo about Tarasenko being good again, because I have not seen that. So I don't think it's a crazy bad return for an okay player having an okay season with a full no move. It's not good.
41 points in 57 games isn't terrible. 17 goals, 24 assists. Like, I think you're seeing a little return to form there.
Yeah, he's definitely improved from what he was last season, but he's also getting an elevated role on a bad team, which he's going to play down the lineup in Florida. But again, that's exactly why they're getting him, so they'll be thrilled with anything near that production in Florida. And again, it's a fine trade given the circumstances. This was Pierre Dorian, one of his last, here you go, good luck guys in the future type of signings.
That was going to be my point on the whole thing. It's a Pierre Dorian signing, and I think they're just trying to wash their hands and provide themselves a little bit more flexibility. And then for me, on the flip side, thinking about Florida, we just watched the Florida Panthers absolutely dismantled the Detroit Red Wings. Does Vlad Tarasenko really move the needle? You know what? To be completely honest, I don't know what Florida Panthers would need to add to their lineup to be a better team. But I guess if a guy wants to go there, you can get him on the cheap. You may as well, but I just don't see how Vlad Tarasenko really pushes them over the top.
I think the teams who have done the best in terms of making deadline deals are the ones who don't sit complacent just because they have good right now. Or the
Fair
ones,
enough.
That's why I actually love the way Vegas works.
But is Tarasenko the guy who's...
Tarasenko's full of talent, man. I understand he's a far cry from what we thought he'd be originally in St. Louis and because of the injuries and stuff. But if you have Tarasenko and you're deploying him, in certain situations without having to eat a ton of minutes, down your lineup, you have Vlad Tarasenko. I can think of worse additions.
True. Yeah. I just didn't know if that was the priority move for them to make. And maybe it just came out of nowhere and they said, okay, like if the cost is low, we may as well add a guy like him.
It's not a bad move by Florida because if you get Tarasenko and you go on a cup run, you show him how he can fit into this lineup and his family wants to be there, that's a guy you can potentially keep on there for cheaper than you would otherwise have to pay a guy of his talents, if it's a fit. And if it's not, who cares? You added a piece for a cup run. Quick interlude here. I'm sure we've said his name in the opening of the podcast of Noah Hanifin. It's just now dropping that he is moving to Vegas, and there's another big deal, potentially a 3-way trade with DeBrusk, Lindholm, and Guentzel. It's a whole...
There's a lot of what-ifs happening right now. So one of the smaller insiders is reporting the Hanifin deal, and Kevin Weeks is on his usual cryptic bullshit, which, God, do I respect that man for just how he just throws stuff out there just to gauge the reactions. Although he has been the first to break a couple of the deals today, so there might be something to that 3-way, because we have heard suggestions. I think it was Chris Johnston was reporting that the Canucks might be flipping Lindholm to the Bruins in an attempt to get Guentzel. So if that does turn into a 3-way deal, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What else other fillers need to be in there to make it work? I don't know. But if the NHL finally has a non-boring trade with some creativity, this could be the start of a brave new world.
When I saw that the Canucks were going to flip Lindholm right after acquiring him, now that they have the security of having Pettersson signed, I thought, hell yeah. That is the kind of cooking with gas trade I love to see in the NHL, just flipping a guy right after that. Because what usually happens, you acquire a guy of that caliber, he's signed for 8 years, and he's immediately off of every trade board for the rest of the time, which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but it's less fun for trade deadline. So unfortunately, you do have to hand it to the Vancouver Canucks, which is always a risky thing to do. All right, as those details kind of come through the pipeline and we try to monitor them in real time, Colorado made 2 moves. First, they brought in Sean Walker and a 5th from Philly in exchange for a 2025 first that's top 10 protected, which is hysterical because if Colorado is top 10 draft pick bad next year, what happened? And Ryan Johansson, who I believe Philly put on waivers right away. And then they also acquired Casey Middelstadt from the Sabres in a 1-for-1 trade for Bowen Byram.
That one was crazy.
Yeah.
I did not see that coming today.
I think everyone's reaction was, whoa.
Yeah. Cue the deal is 1-for-1 jokes. But, hey, how long has it been since we've seen a good hockey trade?
Yeah.
No picks, no prospects. We need a center. You need a D. Here we go. Flip them.
I love 1-for-1 hockey trades. It's like none of this 3rd round in 2027 conditional this. If
we win the cup, the thing, you get a better pick.
One player for one player, mano a mano. Which GM's going to be smarter in the end? It's the easiest thing to dissect. That's just like cut from the old cloth, old time hockey trade. Let's do it. I love that. I wish we could see more of that. I know it's just not the modern NHL, but it's a lot more fun that way. But I could see this working. My initial thought was, Mittelstadt's doing really well, and Byram has the injury questions. He hasn't been at the top of his game since he showed that flash of talent. Like he hasn't had the sustained production or the sustained talent displaying on the ice. But I still think there's a lot of talent there. After I thought about it for a while, Buffalo's defense is going to be interesting to say the least. Like they're going to have a ton of guys all on the left side over there.
I was going to say they have Dahlin, Power, Samuelson, Byram. And now I challenge everybody listening, immediately list one right shooting defenseman on the Sabres D. Either you two? Anybody?
No, I can't.
Not a big Henry Jokiharju fan. Got it. Okay.
Which
I mean, this team is being built in very interesting ways. Lots of talent. How they're going to deploy it all, well, whatever they did this year didn't work, so credit to them for trying something new.
Colorado, though, bringing in Walker and Middelstadt, that's not like that's a good haul.
Colorado's had a very, very good day.
Yeah, and we talked earlier, Philly selling just one of the guys who was out there in Walker. That's good for Detroit. That makes them a bit weaker. That puts them more at play to fall out of the playoff race, which basically it's like baiting the other Metro Division teams who are chasing Detroit for that wild card spot rather than them challenging the Red Wings implicitly for that spot. So it doesn't guarantee anything, but if you're a Red Wings fan and you're thinking playoffs, that's the kind of thing you want to see. So good on Colorado, honestly. And the West, man, Edmonton also adding Sam Carrick and Adam Henrique. They're moving around some picks over there. I actually like that move for them. Like, I understand they're giving up a first and picks, and there's conditions as Tampa Bay helped facilitate that trade, but they get a bunch of retention, and they're able to add depth to the part of the lineup that I think needed depth. And if you're Edmonton and you're watching Colorado load up, like you also do have to be making moves. There's only so many teams that are going to compete with you. You think of Colorado, you think of Dallas, but you're going to have to meet them at some point if you are going to do this thing. So that one made sense to me.
Yeah, they get almost no offense without Draisaitl and McDavid on the ice. And if you're wondering how bad, I recommend you go look it up because it's hilarious. And Henrique will provide good depth scoring for them. So I think that's a big piece. There's also rumors out there that they're still looking for a depth defenseman. So sounds like Justin Holl's music, but we'll see.
Look, it might fit. The New York Rangers acquired Alex Wennberg from Seattle in exchange for a 2024 second and a conditional 2025 fourth that belongs to Dallas. And the condition follows a previous trade, blah, blah, blah. We're not going to get into all that. But the Rangers added a depth center option from Seattle, whose name was popping up recently. And I wondered if that might be like a sneaky Detroit target. But the Rangers, who fancy themselves a contender, add a little bit of offensive firepower down their lineup.
Centers are always at a premium. That's about the entirety of the opinion I have on that trade.
Now, we'll update with the Hanifin return as it comes out, but Vegas, man, adding Hanifin, adding Mantha, making these moves, the way they operate, it's super impressive to see, one, how long they've been able to extend operating this way. You are going to run out of picks eventually. You're seeing the late stages of that right now with the Pittsburgh Penguins, but taking advantage of the cap space that you get under the current rules and adding these guys, this is the right time for them to be making this push and making these moves.
This is what every team should be doing. Once you are firmly in your contender window, and I need to make that part very clear, in your contender window, don't hold back.
Yeah.
A late first round pick is not likely to be an impact player in general. That's how the draft works. And even if it is, it's probably not someone that is helping you until you are near the end or out of your contention window. Do whatever the hell you have to do. The cap's not real. Make it work. And Vegas have done a masterful job of manipulating the cap anytime they can. Unfortunate situation to Markstrom, but the management team is very smart. Fill up that cap space. There is no sense leaving it there.
All right, we're going to take a quick break to let you know that this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown, which I think is similar to what Evan's dressed for right now. So next time you're watching a hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for the Red Wings, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer and great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. And we're back. Brad, I want you to repeat exactly what you just said.
What? That I can't wait for Steve Yzerman to trade for Guentzel in the middle of overtime?
That's the feeling I have this episode. We've already had to pause and edit like 17,000 times because these trades are still happening during our deadline preview. We're not kidding. This is our recording is a sacrifice to the hockey gods.
Should there just be a live episode
It
from now
honestly
on?
should be. Yeah.
Just off the cuff or whatever is happening. We'll do it live.
And you have 32 GMs watching and they're like, all right, they're live. Go, 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 go. Make the trades.
So the only thing with regards to Detroit making a trade tonight and why I'm not comfortable, but at least I believe there's a possibility it might not happen while we're recording. Who the hell is left?
Yeah.
If that three-way deal that Vancouver, Pittsburgh, and Boston are working on is to be believed, who's left that at least Detroit would want?
I'm talking like the kind of move that people would not have expected. I mean, this is just like a hypothetical. It's not based on anything. Do not run with this. But like, imagine Yzerman's making a move for a guy who's not even being considered, like Trevor Zegras or something. Doesn't make sense. Not just a made up thing.
Look in the camera, Ryan. Stop looking at us.
I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I can't look in the eyes of the camera. But what we're going to do is we're going to continue recording, and as the details of, the Hanifin trade or any other big trade happens, we're going to give them to you this episode. But no, there will be a trade deadline review coming after this. So now, tentatively jumping into the Red Wings world, what are Detroit's needs this trade deadline? What are Detroit's needs overall? What's going to happen now versus later? And what do you think Steve Yzerman is likely going to look to do here?
I think everything's on the table. I don't think there's one position where we can say the Red Wings are fully set. We've talked at length. This team still needs another top six forward, probably two. Are those both going to be solved by the deadline? Probably neither, but they're going to be exploring the option. They could use an upgrade at defense. There's been reports that Detroit's looking for a defenseman with quote unquote snarl. And again, don't know who's left in that category. And if they wanted to upgrade the backup goalie or even the starting goalie, if they wanted to swing big, it could be out there. I don't think they're going to address all three. I'd be happy if they addressed one. And I jokingly said who the hell is left, but not jokingly, a lot of the Red Wings rumored targets could be off the board, especially with the reports that Yzerman was big game hunting. We were thinking Hanifin, maybe, gone. Middelstadt, maybe, gone. Guentzel looks like Vancouver's the front runners on that right now. Who knows what pans out there? So I am genuinely curious to see what the backup plan is, or if, like you said, they are just going to go off the board. If it's up to me, the biggest need right now would be the depth scoring. I know I keep hearing defense, but depth scoring, and that has nothing to do with Larkin's injury for what that's worth. I don't think that should factor into this decision at all. I think they could use some more help in a scoring role and preferably someone with term or team control.
So I agree with you. I think Yzerman going big game hunting is going to lead to not a lot happening for two reasons. First of all, there's not a lot of players left. And secondly, whenever you try to make deals that need term with them, because Yzerman is not really a fan of, nor is Detroit in a position to buy rentals. There are situations, and we've talked on previous episodes on how you could do it. Like, let's say you get a team to take Justin Holl's contract, which they need to offload a contract on defense somehow. If the price is you take a rental and you figure it out later, that's actually, in my mind, an agreeable way to do it. But by and large, you're not buying a rental. You're trying to buy with someone with term, and you're trying to buy an impact player. And those things don't really happen very easily in the modern NHL. There's a lot of friction to be able to overcome to get a trade done. We say this as like a three-way mega trade might be happening as we're recording, but still. All that leads to me thinking Yzerman is active on all fronts, but not a lot is going to ultimately happen because the things Yzerman wants to do don't necessarily have to happen now. It's very nice if it can happen now. Like if you can improve the defense in a big way now, that's a huge boon as you get into the playoffs, either to make it or, also considering if you make it, Detroit's defense is its biggest weak point right now. But if you can't get it done, you can't get it done. Those deals aren't available everywhere. Everyone wants solid top four defensemen. That's like the top of every NHL GM's wish list, including a top 6 center. Like, that's what they want, and a goalie who doesn't drive you insane. And Detroit might want all three of those things. Where I differ from you, Brad, is I understand what you're saying about depth scoring, but to me, is you need to improve this defense. At some point, you need to improve this defense. It's going to get exposed badly if they make the playoffs, or that's what they're running the risk of. Do you want to be running Petrie out there in your top 4?
No. Who's available, though?
Yeah, you're going to have to convince a team to do something that they didn't otherwise think they were going to do. But yeah, players are coming off the board fast.
I think for me, with the Red Wings, in my opinion, they don't need more depth scoring. They've already got so many guys who are depth level scoring. They need the big fish. They need someone who's a point per game player. They need to shore up the back end a little bit more, obviously. Do they also look to see if there's a goalie kicking around? What's going on with Markstrom? So there's tons of options and flexibility for the Red Wings, but is now the right time? Do you have the right partner to make trades with? All of that is very much in flux and very much unknown. A guy I wonder about that I haven't heard a whole lot of talk about is Sean Durzi in Arizona. I know he shoots right, but he would be an upgrade. And at the end of the season, he's an RFA. He's got arb right, so it's still team control. So it's not like you're giving up a lot there. He's potentially a rental from Arizona. Depends how they view it. So he could be a nice addition. I know LA was sad to see him go, and I think he could be an excellent addition.
The market right now is interesting because there's a couple good options that fill the needs of what the Red Wings want, but are they in a position to pay it? Like, two names that jump to mind for me that are still available are Buchnevich and Vetrano. Both have 1 year left after this season, and then they hit UFA status, but they're very good players. They're both, 0.7, 0.8 point per game players. Vetrano's almost at 30 goals himself. They would solve a couple big needs for the Red Wings, but the reported asking price for both of them is huge.
Massive.
As it should be, because contenders see these great players and you get 2 playoff runs out of them. Are the Red Wings going to win a Stanley Cup in the next 2 years? No. So should they be paying a massive premium to get that extra year? No, they're not in that position. They're not going to give up. They shouldn't be giving up significant futures for 2 playoff runs where they're going to be thrilled if they get to the second round. That is not the time and place. I know Trevor Zegras is not an Yzerman type, but that's the type of player in terms of where they're at in their career that Yzerman should be looking at. Lots of team control, reasonable cap hit, high-ish end player. But the reason there's so much talk around Zegras is because he's the only one that might even be available. So the more and more this deadline is shaking out and looking at the defensemen available, mostly rentals, you look at a Matt Dumba might fit the bill of what the Red Wings want, except for the problem he's not that good this year. And the forwards that are available that would solve their problems are costing too much. And they're not in a position to pick up a rental unless it's some depth guy, which in that case, who cares? Do it, don't. I don't care. I'm starting to fall to the camp of I kind of am hoping it's a quiet deadline all of a sudden with the way everything has shaken out.
There's still opportunity, but yeah, a lot of this stuff feels like it can happen in the off season. What I will say is what I said earlier on is if you can find a way to offload a contract at the deadline, I'd rather do that now and have some clarity sooner because they're going to have to do it at some point. The things that you can solidly confirm based on what's out there and what we're hearing is that, yes, Yzerman is shopping defenseman and Holl seems to be the contract that he's trying to put out there 2 seasons after this one at not an insignificant dollar value. It's going to cost you to get rid of those 2 years. And then also, being linked to guys like Brian Rust out of Pittsburgh, Pontiac, Michigan native who has a lot of money left on his deal. And that would have to be like, you can't think about bringing in that kind of contract without also shedding a lot of money. And it might mean not signing the players that you think about signing. It means, Sprong's definitely gone. Gostisbehere's definitely gone. And if you're bringing back Perron for how much money? Not very much. And that's why, when I brought up Buchnevich and, Guentzel, someone said to me, yeah, those are pie in the sky ideas, but you already have an issue with cap and your forward and your wingers. Like, where are you going to put these guys? How are you going to afford
LTIR, then we'll go get no Hanifin.
Yeah,
it's all made up.
Watch your spleens. The cap's made up. But in all seriousness, like if you want to make these kinds of big moves, it's going to be in both directions. It's not just going to be your stable of prospects and picks, of which Detroit can lean on pretty heavily. They have a cap situation on their hands. They have a roster slot situation on their hands, which is a good issue. The second one, like you have more guys in their actual slot, so that makes sense. But then you're going to have to start exploring things like, where's Robbie Fabry going to be on this team? And are you better off shedding his contract? Like a lot of things have to move. The good news is they can, and the good news is it doesn't all have to happen in the next 48 hours here, for example.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think the Red Wings are probably in a pretty good position to do some minor upgrades. You know, a 4th-round pick for a depth rental defenseman. Great. I just dumped on Matt Dumba being bad this year. You get him for a 4th, he's still an upgrade on Petrie.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
and at least brings the nastiness that you're looking for in the lineup.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, there's probably some other depth defensemen out there who fit the same bill that we're just not thinking of off the top of our head. And that's fine. I'm at the point in the rebuild, anything beyond a 2nd-round pick means nothing to me. They have such a strong stable of prospects and they have so many picks and they don't need more depth. They need premium talent. So you hold on to your 1st and your 2nd-round picks and take a couple swings and hope. Beyond that, whatever. We know the percentages on those picks. And if you think Matt Dumba helps you get to the playoffs this year and that's worth the boost to the room, fantastic. And again, I keep using him as the example. If you want to swing a bigger deal and you give Arizona a 2nd for Matt Dumba, but they have to take Justin Holl as well, great. Go for it. If it solves a future problem and helps a current situation, great. But I don't see the path to something super significant right now. And again, circling back to like what Ryan said, unless it's something nobody has even reported yet as someone who could be available.
Something that I'm hearing is that Chychrun is a lot more available than Ottawa's letting on. And I suspected that earlier in the year. Like they were saying the right things about him, but Ottawa as an organization, even with this change of regime over there, it's so leaky, it almost makes you jealous covering the Red Wings. But I think Chychrun is a lot more available than they're letting on, and he's a player that I do wonder about in terms of, is that the kind of big move that Yzerman would go for? It's pointed out quite a bit that Jacob Chychrun's, probably more name value than actual value based on how his career trajectory has gone, and Ottawa fans aren't like totally enamored with him. But at the same time, like that's a guy who has one more season at $4.6 million. You want to improve your defense, and he's a guy who can absolutely do that. He can play either the left or right side. He shoots left. You want to pair someone with Edvinsson as he gets better next season and wants to move up the lineup. You can think of worse players to put with him. And frankly, you need to improve this decor. Gostisbehere is likely to go away this offseason. I don't know that Detroit's necessarily linked. I think Detroit's been around on him, but a player like Chychrun's available. A lot of teams are going to ask. I could see that being a fit and also fitting the bill of, Yzerman's going big game hunting for maybe someone that isn't like immediately available, like the Hanifin types.
Few thoughts on that. First being, I think you're right. That would be a phenomenal fit. A really good defenseman can play either side. Definitely an upgrade over, everybody but Wallman and Seider at this point, maybe even Wallman. But again, I'm circling back to a point I made about Buchnevich and Vetrano. Are you paying a premium for a year and a half for anybody right now? Yeah, maybe his agent's talking with Yzerman and going, we would be very interested in an extension. That is something that piques our attention. We could get something done this summer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We know those conversations happen.
Yeah.
They can't be admitted, but if there is that wink, wink, nudge, nudge extension in the works, okay. I'm okay with that. But if there isn't, and you are giving up, Ottawa just traded a 1st and a 2nd for him no more than a year ago? Should Detroit be doing that right now? Absolutely not. No chance.
You're smart for thinking about this, Brad, and constantly qualifying that. My brain automatically goes to, they're not really doing that without the knowledge of extending, because Steve Yzerman time and time again has said, I only want things that help this team down the road. He wants the best of both worlds, and you can have it, but it narrows the pie quite a bit. Now let's talk Brian Rust, because it was reported by Josh Yeo that Detroit has expressed the most interest in him, and we should start this off by saying Pittsburgh has told Bryan Rust that they're not going to ask him to waive his no-trade clause this season, and if this happens, it's most likely to be off-season. But he is a winger who has $5.125 million AAV for 4 seasons after this one. Productive winger, 36 points in 42 games. This season, about half a point per game. Before that, a little over half a point per game in general before. So a guy plays, skates like the wind, plays a hard kind of game that Detroit's looking for. The Michigan native, which is always a boost to what Yzerman's looking for. But 5.125 is a lot of money. And if that's going to happen in the offseason, things are going to have to shake up.
And he's 32 years old very soon. I really like Bryan Rust as a player. We all know Steve Yzerman has a blind spot for his type, and Bryan Rust is absolutely his type. Given the contract and his age, and the fact that in Detroit he won't be playing with either Sidney Crosby or Evgeny Malkin, I know this is going to sound extreme. I'm not sure I take him if you give him to me for free.
No, I disagree.
I think I would consider it, but I'm not sure I would do it. And the fact that that's even a thought in my head means I'm definitely not giving up an asset for it.
The thing is, Kyle Dubas will want the cap flexibility, but you can probably give him something. Like, you're doing him a favor, but you can probably give him something decent. A halfway decent pick or a halfway decent prospect, but you don't have to sell. Like, you're not talking a first prospect or anything like that. Like, it wouldn't be a crazy price.
Even at that, though, give me a percentage. What is your confidence level that Bryan Rust is going to be worth that cap hit for the next 4 years?
25%.
Exactly. If that's not over 50, I'm not taking him for free, because the Red Wings are going to have a salary cap issue, and now you're adding another 5.1 into a mid-30s forward. That money can be spent way better elsewhere.
Here's my thought. If Detroit didn't do 3 other deals that felt like this one at both forward and defense.
Oh, yeah. No Andrew Kopp, no Justin Holl, no Jeff Petrie, no Ben Trott. Yeah, 100%. You have the flexibility to do it, but that's not the reality we're living in right now.
Without the cap apprehension, to me, there's a fit.
100% there's a fit. He's a good player. I'm not trying to demean Bryan Rust. He's a really good player, and he is exactly the type of player Steve Yzerman loves and this team is building around. But that's almost my bigger concern is we have seen Steve Yzerman give up too much in the draft capital, in contract term, in AAV to players that are quote unquote his type. All his biggest mistakes have been trying to fit this mold of a player that he likes. And I agree with this is the type of player that you win with, but it has caused more problems because it keeps happening over and over and over again. And again, like you said, and I'm happy you said it, if the Red Wings didn't have all these other problem contracts, 100% you would be in on this. Why wouldn't you want? Any contender would want Bryan Rust. But the Red Wings aren't a contender, and they have these cap issues. So I see the fit on the ice, but on the cap-friendly page, it looks like a nightmare to add to this team.
Well, let's transition into a cap issue. I like the joke that Friedman made when someone suggested to him that Justin Holl, obviously Detroit's trying to shop him, get rid of his contract. He's a 10-team, no trade list. He has 2 more years at $3.4 million. Shoots right. The Toronto Maple Leafs are looking for a right-handed D.
He only plays well against Toronto.
The Maple Leafs fans would combust. If they brought in Lyubushkin and Holl, they would be begging for Kyle Dubas back.
This would immediately be my favorite season in hockey history if that happened.
It would be hysterical. That's the thing, though. Like, for all of Yzerman's mistakes, I was thinking as I was driving today, I was like, I remember the Leddy trade and thinking, that's a steep price to pay. And now we have Jake Wallman because of what he did with Leddy after that. Like, the recovery from what I think is an average amount of mistakes for a GM to make, although Yzerman's do tend to come in 1 or 2 types, as you very rightly pointed out, Brad, that in that kind of, you're like, what's going to happen there? But the recovery from it is often so bafflingly good and funny. Like, the Red Wings got that return from St. Louis, and Wallman was an afterthought to some people, and now he's playing on Detroit's first pair. So if Yzerman's able to get rid of Justin Holl and give him back to Toronto, that would be hysterical.
Hey, part of being a strong general manager, just an intelligent person in general, is recognizing your mistakes and trying to correct them. And we said I think we were pretty close to the same opinion, that was a bad contract from the day it was signed. And it didn't take Yzerman apparently very long to realize it, and he's now trying to right our mistake.
We're not going to get into, talking about everything we talked about in the offseason, but very obviously had a goal in mind with his defense, and it just didn't pan out in the way between Petrie and Holl. Those guys didn't provide the kind of stability and veteran depth that maybe, Ben Sherratt was able to turn around his career with Detroit and be able to provide this season. So it's funny how that all shook out.
Well, it was very obvious what they were trying to do, and it was a very correct way to build the defense. You get a lot of big, mobile, defensively sound guys and put them on your blue line, and you mix in one or two offensive guys, and you make life hell for the other team to try to generate offense. And that was the vision he had. That's the vision he's going for. It just turns out two of the guys he acquired were really bad. So I shouldn't say really bad, but they are no longer effective.
They're not a fit for what Detroit needs.
Exactly.
And leading into that, a big reason why their cap situation needs addressing, because you might be looking at their cap friendly page and thinking, oh, they have cap flexibility and the cap's going up next year. Mo Seider is going to get a raise. Lucas Raymond's going to get a raise. Now, there's multiple ways of doing those deals, but we've seen time and time again, and Detroit has been reported to be working on those extensions right now because they're up this season. They're restricted free agents as they come off their entry-level contracts. But the best way to sign your star talent who are coming off their ELCs, sign them for as long as possible. Buy as many years as you can because they're only going to get better. Obviously, the most likely thing for Lucas Raymond was to wait it out. And why would he sign after a down year last year? But imagine the price if you could have locked down Lucas Raymond earlier before the season he's having. You don't fault Yzerman for that. Lucas Raymond, if he had a halfway decent agent, which he does, says no, wait for the bounce back, which is what's happened. Mo Seider, that's going to be an interesting negotiation because the thing that most readily translates into dollars on your contract is points. And Mo Seider's, not like he's had bad production, but a lot of times his focus has been being bogged down defensively and just carrying the whole team, the whole defense on his back. And it doesn't translate to the best underlying numbers, but Red Wings fans know how important he is on the ice. All that to say, these guys are going to need raises and you're going to want to extend them for as long as possible. If you get into a situation where you have to give them bridge contracts and then pay them more later on, you're running the risk. You're losing an opportunity to keep a window open later when you're super competitive, because they're going to be making even more money. So Detroit needs to unknot a lot of what their contract inefficiencies are so they can pay Seider and Raymond now for 8 years if they can each.
There is a time and a place in a situation where bridge contracts make sense. You pay the guy a little less for 2 or 3 years because he knows he's going to get a bigger payday in a few years. But the team is in a contention window, and saving a few mil on the cap for the next 2-3 years is huge to their cup aspirations because they get that extra money to spend on whatever they want. Look at Dallas and Jason Robertson right now. They're screwed in a couple of years with him because he's going to cost $1 billion. But right now they have a first line star forward making less than $8 million. It's in a great situation for them in their cup window. The Red Wings are not in that window. There is no sense in signing Raymond or Seider to a bridge deal right now unless their agents are saying, we are not considering anything else. Don't even ask. 8 years for Seider, 8 years for Raymond, if they are open to it, is a no-brainer. If you have to overpay a little bit on the AAV, it's still worth it. The cap is going to increase. Those percentages get better. It's short-term pain because you're paying a higher cap hit next year for long-term gain. And again, reiterating, I don't think anybody listening right now is thinking the Detroit Red Wings are winning a Stanley Cup in the next 2 years. So don't plan for the next 2 years. Plan for the big picture. And Yzerman, to this point, has done a very good job of that. So I have no reason to think he's not already thinking the same thing we are. But we're a podcast. I'm expressing my opinion. It should be 8 years each unless they are just completely unwilling to do it.
And that's the thing. It's smart from the player's side the book is out on what to do with these players from a GM point of view. A good agent will say, no, stick on 3 years, 4 years, whatever, take the bridge. And if the team wants you to flex, maybe go, 4 to 5, but take the bridge because the cap is going to go up dramatically and you're going to get paid. And if the players don't want to move off that, then it comes down to the skill of the negotiation and who's going to draw the hard line and who's going to blink first. It's not the end of the world if they bridge them to some degree, but it is sacrificing how big your window is and how much you can maneuver. So it's not like the world is over. The same way it's not like the world is over if the Red Wings lose, to Colorado and Vegas this weekend. It's not over if you don't get full 8 years on Seider and Raymond. But it would be like the best case scenario is that you do get 8 years. And then I almost don't care about the numbers. Between 7 and 8 for Raymond and between like 8.75 and 9.5 for Seider. In and around there, probably, give or take. But you want to know how you figure things out. You have Larkin locked up forever, and you lock up those two guys, then you can operate around that core.
I think I agree with both of you. I think if you've identified that Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider are core pieces to this team going forward, you get them locked down for as long as you possibly can. I think you start at 8 and hope they're interested in that. Hope the relationship and the equity you've built since they've come into the league can allow you to get to that spot. I think bridging them is extremely dangerous, especially if they pop off. And trying to frame it to a player where it sounds like you want them to still be there after 2 years, 3 years, but you just don't want to pay them right now is very difficult. We've seen relationships break down in contract negotiations where players will be like, okay, I'm going to sign this deal, but the next time it comes around, I'm going to take a look around. And
that's what Robertson's, he's going to take him to the cleaners, Dallas.
Oh, he's going to get $12-13 million.
But Dallas probably doesn't care because I think right now is go time for them, and this is their window. Their team is absolutely loaded. They can't even get the 2 top scorers in the AHL into their roster full time. So they have the luxury where they can do that. But yes, Jason Robertson is going to have a couple Brinks trucks backed up onto his front lawn when the time comes for a new contract.
Like, if all goes well for Detroit, we're sitting here in 4 to 5 years going, man, I hope Axel Sandin Pelika's bridge is really cheap because we could use those extra $4 million for this season or whatever it is, right? You want Detroit to get into the position where bridge makes sense, but we're not there yet.
So that's the Red Wings. That's the cap implications of what they're doing. So yeah, Seider and Raymond factor into that. Whether they bridge at all, if they can get them on max term, is going to affect how much they're going to have to do next year. At the very least, they're going to have to be moving some contracts, which might feed into what's happening this deadline. But other than that, I guess final predictions. Does Detroit get anything done this deadline? How active do you think Yzerman is? And what's your dart at the dartboard for what Steve Yzerman's going to do? Which, good luck to you on that one.
I'm going to say he is unsuccessful in moving Justin Holl's contract because that is a lot of money to move, and I don't see a way it happens without retention, which I don't know if Yzerman's keen on doing that for 2 more years. Might be, but he's not. I'm going to say they acquire a depth defenseman, somebody along the lines of a Matt Dumba. I don't think it'll cost a lot, probably a rental. Yeah, I'm hesitant to say they're going to do anything big just based on what's available right now.
Super hard to predict that a big move will happen because A, it's Steve Yzerman, and B, it's incredibly difficult. Well, maybe not incredibly difficult anymore in today's NHL to make the superstar or the elite level trades that podcasters like to talk about. So all that to be said, I just don't know. All of that adds up to a big I don't know. If I was to just be pie in the sky, I'm looking for a bad team or a team that's about to rebuild who's got maybe a point per game player that you can get, and depending on the cost, that's the kind of guy I'm looking for. The Red Wings got enough depth up front for me. They need to go for someone who's higher than a depth piece, like a bolt-on top 6 forward.
All right, I'm going to be delusional. They're able to shed a defensive contract, and I'm not even going to say which. It could be anyone. And they also make a significant trade for either a defenseman or a goalie. Just because I feel like getting weird.
Goalie.
It's in play. We've heard, and if you think about it, Detroit has one goalie that's working for them right now, and we really, we said after we recorded last episode, we didn't really talk a lot about the fact that Lyon has cooled off.
Markstrom wouldn't even need to change his pads.
No, it's fine enough. It's close enough to the colors.
Yeah.
You have that goalie tandem or whoever else, like, they might try to figure something out on that front. The little thing in my brain is still saying, Chychrun could be the time, but I will freely admit I'm making the most delusional, least likely prediction out of all of us. I'm just doing it for some fun.
What would we have to give up to get Trevor Zegras and John Gibson from the Ducks?
Thought to cross my mind, but no, that's getting too weird. Okay, very quickly before we get into overtime here, if you're on YouTube, you can see the sweater I'm wearing. This is from Kiwi Clo, and they sent this to us, so big shout out to them for sending this over. In collaboration with Vladimir Konstantinov and Jake Wallman, Kiwi Clo is dropping a limited collection of tees, hoodies, hats, and beanies. Kiwi Clo is a Detroit-based streetwear brand, which we love, and they focus on telling a story through apparel while benefiting a different charity through each drop. Sales will benefit Konstantinov's Special Needs Trust and Red Wings defenseman Jake Wallman's efforts with the Boys and Girls Club of Detroit. The drop goes live on Friday, March 8th, the trade deadline day, on kiwiclo.com. That's KIWICLO.com. It's a sweet sweater. They sent us a hat as well. We'll show off some more of their gear. It is a great, great initiative, obviously, for Vladdy and Jake Wallman, forever for the kids, is doing his work, as he mentioned, that he would be doing for the Boys and Girls Club of Detroit. So an excellent cause and some great gear. So check out Kiwi Clo. All right, let's jump into overtime. Overtime on this special trade deadline preview episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast is brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. If you want to support the show, you get access to the ticket giveaways, the bonus episodes, the Discord, and lots more. And you allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation, host Winged Wheel Podcast nights at the LCA and with the Grand Rapids Griffins. As well, you allow us to continue to grow and produce the show and do cool things. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. Kyle Koob and a couple other people say, does the Larkin injury have any impact on Steve Yzerman's plans for the deadline?
Shouldn't. Better not. If you're making deals based on a 2-week time window in a non-contending year, that's pretty short-sighted.
I think you would have seen Detroit in and around someone like Wenberg a little heavier. Probably not going to happen. Winterhawks Bandwagoner says, how much of a downgrade would Berggren be next year if the Wings choose not to / can't re-sign Sprong?
Like, not super substantial, but noticeable.
The thing about Sprong is, like, you can see the way he plays why his, like, internal cap of minutes is where it's at. It's not a coincidence that Seattle and Detroit viewed him that way. They didn't not value him. It's just that's the best way to get the most out of him without having the deficiencies in his game be a liability on the ice. You obviously don't want to lose someone of that kind of scoring out of your depth, but you can't pay him too much for the reason that you can't be playing him 19 minutes a night, So that's tough to lose for sure. I agree with you, Brad. It would be a downgrade, but not like the end of the world. Matt says, hey guys, what do you think of Alex DeBrincat as a Red Wing so far? To non-Wings fans, it seems like recruiting Kane has been his best stat this year, and he's been overshadowed. He's not on a 40-goal pace, but none of us projected that this year. I just wonder if anything has surprised you this year after seeing him every game.
No, he's come about as expected.
Yeah,
pretty streaky scorer, but better playmaking than he gets credit for. He's on pace for 70-something points. Yeah, it's about what I expected.
Wings fan in St. Louis had a similar question about the Larkin going down, brand new name level supporter. So thank you for that. It's probably not going to change too much. Joseph Barry asked about Buchnevich. If he's available, do you have to go out and get him? And just alluding to what Brad said before, it's just such an expensive price and you have so many other decisions to make. Like, it certainly doesn't hurt the Red Wings, but I don't know that it's a must need to do.
If he had 2 extra years on his deal, I would say, yeah, go at this very, very aggressively. But he doesn't, so I wouldn't.
Sergeant Slim Jim says, hey, Dubs, I'm thinking about goalies today and want to know what you think about the future of the Red Wings goaltending. If Kosa and Augustine both become NHL caliber goalies, do you think the Wings will have a duo like Boston's Ullmark and Swayman combo, or more of a reliable backup so the starter can avoid fatigue? When these guys finally make it to the NHL, what does Yzerman do with Lyon and Husso? Would he think about trading one and keeping Lyon or Husso? So many different possibilities, but the potential for great goaltending excites me almost as much as the Wings finally making it back to the playoffs. Probably. Thanks in advance. Stay fresh and keep your stick on the ice. Let's go Red Wings.
I will say this as politely as I can. If by the time Kosa and Augustine break through to the NHL, we're still riding Husso and Lyon, we have far bigger problems.
Not necessarily. What if they both really cemented themselves?
That would all have to happen next year.
But what you're saying is goalies operate on such a long timeline.
Yes.
And it's all like in this hypothetical, and this is a long shot hypothetical that they both make it. It's just the reality of goaltending. Ullmark Swayman is like the recipe for success in the NHL. It's just almost impossible to get.
It's 1,000% what you do if you have the luxury.
But almost nobody has that luxury.
And especially when they first come into the league, they're going to be cheap. Like, of course you would try to milk that for all you can.
Another thing to think about is when young goalies come into the league, it's very rare for them to be successful right away. You want them to be backups. You want them to have to earn their games. Both of them making it at the same time is extremely unlikely. If they push you into making a decision to deal one, sure, but you don't want them being your number one guy unless they're doing something almost unheard of. Like, goalies suck when they make the NHL. It's extremely hard to be a goalie in the NHL and be, like prime Carey Price. It just doesn't really happen a lot. This one from Jarzilla, I think is a funny question. It says, this is my first year watching hockey. When did the trades really start coming? Are there usually a lot, or is it pretty tame? Super excited to see what happens this week.
He sent this morning, didn't he?
Yep, he sure did. Sent it 9 hours ago.
That is phenomenal.
There's no formula for the trade deadline. Some years it's just so dull. I remember watching Trade Center and you stay home from work and you watch and you're like, nothing happened.
And nothing happened.
And generally hockey trades are just boring. Took this GM 3 weeks to negotiate a 4th round pick for this 3rd line winger. It's notoriously awful. There's a whole reason I want this 3-way trade to happen between Pittsburgh, Boston, and Vancouver, because I just want the NHL to prove to me they can do it.
But some years you get all of it happening earlier in the week. Some years you have it happening 2 days before, like today. And some years that it happens all at the deadline. That's my personal favorite, where deadline day is deadline day. But I will never complain about the NHL just actually getting years done, because the seasons where nothing happens, it feels miserable. I'm not the kind of person where I'm saying manufacture the trades and make it easier to trade players all the time. And it should be like the NBA, but I will say it's a lot more exciting when it happens.
Yeah, the NBA is not, all the players are not afraid to just say, yeah, I'm good. I'm going to go play for this team at X, Y, and Z time of the year. The NHL is definitely more calculated and definitely more vanilla in their trading strategies. But I remember there's trade deadlines where it was 3 hours past the deadline. They're we're still getting,
pulling
because
hopper.
They only have one fax machine at the NHL Central Registry, so that thing was working overtime. I hope it goes into the Hall of Fame.
You never hear the word hopper more.
Oh my God. The NHL's got one hopper too.
There could be trades in the hopper. There's trades in the hopper. It's waiting in the queue. There's a trade in the hopper.
That gave me PTSD a little bit.
And you want to know who loves coming in under the wire is Steve Yzerman. So it honestly won't be until 5:30 p.m. where I feel safe knowing what Detroit did or didn't do. So it's really funny. In summary for the trade deadline preview is my honest take based on what makes sense for Detroit. What you're hearing in terms of rumors, what's reported and who's left out there is that Yzerman wants to do a lot of different things, and none of them are very likely to happen. So Detroit has the most opportunity in latitude to do things that make sense for their team and the narrowest real window to do it. So I think in all, it's a lot of anticipation, and I think the likeliest outcome is very little output right now. Fun stuff.
But great times.
But hey, if it goes buck wild, you're going to be hearing from us sooner than Sunday. So listen to this now before it all comes out of date. The Hanifin return hasn't even been posted yet, so we're going to stop recording.
It's in the hopper.
It's in the hopper. God. All right, let's wrap this episode up. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for bearing with us as we tried to follow the news as it was coming in. To all of our Patreon supporters, we appreciate you. Labatt for sponsoring the Winged Wheel podcast. To all of our listeners, new and old, welcome to the show. And to all of our name level supporters on Patreon, Arjun Shanker, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Brad's Lord and Savior Bradley Cleveland, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Keenan O'Donohue, Yanni Burgers, Meals on Wheels, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. at the Cheesebag Navy, Carl, Brutanen Analuski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, DJ Denton, Fear the Goalie, brand new name level supporter. Welcome to the Dub Dub Club. God Creatives, Give Blood Fight Probert, Have You Ever Drank Bailey's from a Shoe, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al Qassem, I Still Don't Like Kane, Jake Ullum, Jacob Turner, Joel Miranda, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Marcus, Marlon Winchester, Matt K, Cannon Fodder, The Cheesebag Army, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Red Feathered Desert Dogs, Ryan, 50 Hannah Cap Hannah, Scott Martin, Screen Lube, That's What I Appreciate About You, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, The Seider House Rules, brand new name level supporter. Welcome to the Dub Dub Club. Iserplan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, AB, Adam Rose, Antonio Gracias, Axel Sandy Pelica, Bellingham Acid Balls, Brad Simmons, Brian Vasha, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarpless Goon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, D-Boss Snip Show, Derek James, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Adobo, JM Rhapsody, Jogan, Rafferty Fan Club, John Evans, Derogatory, John Engels, John Page, brand new name level supporter. Welcome, man. Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Maximilian, Melissa Erickson, Michigan Boy and Avs Country, Ophelia, Red Wing Tar Heel, Reed, Shahid Syed, Steven, The Hodag, The Mexanadian, The Hat 123, Wings fan in St. Louis, brand new name level supporter, ex-formerly AA Ron, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll see what happens.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.